policies you don't like, what are you going to do about it? Can you do something about it? I think that's why understanding yourself, limit what you worry about to things that you can actually do something about. I think I'm really focused on action. People like to say everybody can do something about something. That's for sure. But that something is different for different people. Education today, or traditionally, the traditional education paradigm, Yannick, is always about
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Foundation Distinguished Professor Yong Zhao from the University of Kansas to discuss the role and the importance of learning, why we have to redefine learning, and how to redefine learning, and for what purpose. Welcome, Professor Yong Zhao, back to the show. It's always a special privilege to have you back and really to dissect your work and talk about, at this pivotal moment in history, with you about education, the future, and really what it means to learn in this day and age.
Well, thank you, Yannick. It's so happy to be back. I think it's good time to rethink and re-talk about learning.
And I have to say, this reach for greatness is just a classic that every teacher, everyone in education ought to really dissect and really deeply start integrating in his or her practice. Really, thank you so much for this incredible source of learning. So let's start. So what shall learning do first and foremost, and what shall it invoke, and what is it in the first place?
Well, I think, as I wrote in the book, Reach for Greatness, we want our children, each and every one of them, to reach their own greatness. But if you look at education today, or traditionally, the traditional education paradigm, Yannick, is always about everybody doing the same thing. You go through different grades, you're learning the same curriculum, you pass the same test, and then we want our children to be equally good. But it's impossible to be equally good. You must be familiar with the argument over achievement gaps. Why some children from certain backgrounds do better and others don't. After several decades of trying, the achievement gap remains the same. It's not closed. And we have to rethink about what is learning. And learning, to me, is a further development of your natural born capabilities, your natural born personalities, your naturally born actually motivation, the intrinsic motivation. But everybody is born different. Some people, following their multiple intelligence theory, some people are greater in one area, but others in other areas. Nobody is equally good. So if you spend the same time developing something you have talent versus something you don't have talent, you have different outcomes. And also, people are born into different families, have different experiences, different communities, different cultures. So I think in the end, whatever we dream that our children would learn the same curriculum, advance in the same speed, reach the same level, is a fantasy. That's impossible. So to help everybody to become great, we have to personalize learning. And this is now much more important in the age of AI, is also much more possible in the age of AI.
Yeah, it's so important. And what I also want to unpack further when it comes to learning is really what you really write in the book is that oftentimes we look at what is lacking, right? As you say, achievement gap, rather than actually what is here, what we can actually build. Because we all need different capabilities and skills in order to keep a complex society alive and keep going, right? So I really want to have a sense of you how this really was realized in your personal journey, because your personal journey is pivotal in order to get for us to get some context, because you were in this sense actually lucky that your parents were, lucky and not so lucky obviously, but that your parents so somehow applied self-determination theory really to your journey, and that's why you became one of the foremost leader in the philosophy of education.
Well, I think, it's personally, I have always been trying to find a way to avoid my weaknesses and avoid things that I was not good and I was not interested in. As previously we chatted, and I was born and raised in a tiny, small rural village in China in the 1960s. And at first, I was really bad at most of the farming things, and I did not like them either. I mean, typically, you don't like what you're not good at anyway. So that's how I went to school. Not many children in my village wanted to go to school. I went to school because I was bad at something. And then again, later on, for example, specifically, I specialized in English, not because I was better or more interested in English, but because my math was really bad. Like we joked about, Chinese can be bad at math. I was horrible at math. I got 3 out of 100 in the college entrance exam, which is naturally very bad. But if you think about it, a lot of us are trying to make up, to say, like if you're not good at something, your parents, your teachers said, well, spend more time, do something about it. But my view is that that's not going to help you. Even though, like, for example, I could have had a better math teacher, I could have done better in math, but would that really get me to do what I was interested in doing, to tap into my talent? I think that's a question, Yannick. I'm sure your audience, your teachers, your parents, I mean, even individual students may not try to accept that in order to be good, you have to be bad. In order to be good at something, you have to be bad at something.
I think this is so brilliant, and that's what you are really touching on it. And I think that's what also the role is of an educator, is to help really flesh out what you're really good at, right? And in your case as well, you knew, okay, that's something that I'm really not good at. So that's already helped you to focus more and more and more, right? So it's ultimately it's a strength, right? it The weakness becomes a strength in you finding truly what you are meant to do. And today, that's why I'm every time so excited to have you, because you are a true inspiration. You're not just an incredible scholar, but also just your humanity. I'm so appreciate about this, and because it's so relevant, especially in an age of AI. So let's dive a little bit into the specifics. How do we find purpose? Because one of the biggest challenges now, it's complexity. We have to cut through the complexity. People, especially young students, they are just basically, they don't take any action because there's so many variables out there, so many things that they think they might be able to go, but ultimately it's a illusion. So we have to basically cut through the complexity, find to somehow, simplicity. But the question is, how do we do it?
Well, I think, the first thing we all have to do is to accept that people are different. In political slogans, we say, oh, people are different, we're diverse, diversity is good. But I don't think that view is accepted in our schools. We treat difference as a mark of good or bad. You're only quantitatively different. The traditional view is that, this person get a 90 in math, that person get 30 in math. So the 90 person is better than the third person. But if we abandon that view, we'll say, okay, you may be 90 or 100 in math or English, but I am 100 or 90 in dancing, for example. And you have to accept that. I wrote another article, actually. It's called The Rise of the Useless. We have to accept the broad perspectives that can be useful. And today's society has come to a place that almost, I would say, literally, actually, not almost, every talent is useful, is valuable. If you go back to any massive society, if you do any massive operation, you rely on the diversity of talents. Even ancient times, when there were not so many different kind of jobs, if you were leading a political or military campaign against another country, just imagine, you don't need just only the soldiers, you need the commanders, you need chefs, you need people who can transport. I mean, it's a diversity of things. Of course, today is a lot of research has shown diversity matters, but our schools refuse to accept that. So therefore, we prescribe this content for all students, but based on what? We don't know. Maybe based on a few people say, oh, if you want to do this, you have to do this, this, and that. But really, like today, if we ask every teacher or every school what they try to teach every child to learn and to do, will that matter in 5 or 10 years? If not, who is responsible? Because we are working so hard to instill, to impose a uniform curriculum on everybody. But is that truly valuable in the age of AI or in the future of the children's life? I think that's the first thing, practical thing. Governments, educational systems, school leaders, teachers, and even parents have to accept your children are not there to compete in the same domain against other children. I mean, if you're good with the traditional subjects, that's fine. But the school subjects may only serve maybe 20% of the students. That's why so many students are disengaged. So if we can accept that, then we are enabling our children and our parents to rethink not what they're bad, not to improve what they're not good, but rather to reinvent new pathways for themselves.
I really appreciate what you bring up in terms of difference, because usually we see this conceptually, we understand that diversity really is a strength, right? But unfortunately, this doesn't really apply as we see in traditional education in so many ways. But also, we don't really apply it when it comes to different way of thinking, different way of thought, right? And so there is a certain imposition that I see in education. Why is that?
Well, I think, first of all, you look at modern schooling has, when it was first started, it was started to deliver uniform curriculum for all children. And traditionally, we think, there are certain skills that everybody should have. If you think about in the Prussian system, which actually spread across the globe, every system is doing that. So, same classroom, one teacher to all students, the textbook, the subjects, now standardized testing. I think we accepted that for about over 100, 200 years. Our parents have accepted what school should be like. There is a phrase called grammar of schooling. That is, we treat schools this as the same. There's a grammar operating. We divide knowledge into subjects. We divide a school day into different periods. We divide students into groups based on age, and that's how it's been operating. There may be some value, when you are trying to make sure everybody has literacy. 100 200 years ago, when you are making sure everybody has basic math. But today it is different. And also the learning conditions are different. Traditionally, we had to rely on the teacher. In a village, in a small neighborhood, a teacher has to go teach the students the same thing for efficiency reasons. The school cannot possibly teach everybody. But today, in the age of AI, in the in the age of actually new operations, learning is different. You truly can learn with AI, from AI, through AI. You truly can learn globally online. They can listen to your podcast. They can go on YouTube, TikTok. The information is so different now. Just in merely 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't like this. So the possibility is here, as well as the necessity, as I explained, is here. Because traditionally we also follow the old, almost satirical concept of meritocracy. We said, oh, if you do better, you'll have better positions socially. But that's a satire invented in 1958 by, I think Michael Young is that. But the ideas of meritocracy based on your intellect plus effort is wrong, because a human being does not have one intellect and does not have one type of effort. Depends on where you're born with. Like for example, in my village today, even still in China, we had very little access to different things. Even if you had the intellect, it would be applied to different context. So if you are born in New York or suburbs of New York versus born in downtown New York, you might have very different experiences. So in that sense, that we need people to look hard at themselves and to adjust their learning pathways towards more self intrinsically motivated to learn with others through and with AI.
And what you also actually mentioning is really it has to be based on interest and on your passions, right? And what's really important too when we look at the time where things change so rapidly is really that we base our education in one way or another on certain core values. In other words, on really perennial wisdom almost that somehow can stand the test of time. So, how do you think we can go about it when it comes to education? What are some of the core values we should put forward that we know that's for sure, whether we have AI or not, it will be applicable and it will be helpful for the present and especially for future generations?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to teach students to always try to understand themselves, to explore who they are, because nobody knows naturally what your strength is, what your interests are. You don't know. So you always start by doing something. But doing something, you will discover maybe that's not your strength. Maybe that's not your interest. If not, well, try something different. I think it's a process of exploration, identification, giving up, finding new ones, develop new possibilities. So we have a program we're running in different countries. It's called ICEE, called Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship Education, in which the first principle is called personalized learning, and then in which the first thing we do is called explore me through we. me through we. So basically, you try to find out. For example, when people ask you to make an introduction, Yannick, you may say, "Oh, I'm Yannick. I do this, do that, and that." But you ask somebody else to introduce you, they might be different. So what you know yourself is not only you, the exploration is through others, through what you do. So you don't really just think, oh, I'm good at this, but what have you done to serve your interest or serve your strength? I think that's the first basic principle. The second one is really what I recently developed idea in the age of AI is the ability to find problems or find questions. AI can give you answers, but AI cannot ask your questions. So we always think about, when you think about your interest and your strength, you always try to say, okay, how is my interest and strength valuable? You said, okay, can you use your strength and interest to find and solve problems for others? That's the second principle. I think, in this age, being able to find significant problems and find ways to solve them is very significant for other people. And then through which you come to the third one is that, you know, that's the purpose of living, right? Human beings wants to have autonomy, but also wants to have purpose. So I use my strength, my interest to find and solve problems for others, for the society, for the world. And therefore, you develop a new form of human relationship. It's not a meritocracy type of competition, but human interdependence. It's very simple. Like Yannick, you're doing a podcast. That's a great service to me because I'm not. So you are transferring my thinking to others. You're serving me, but at the same time, I am serving you by providing you content. That's human interdependence. So people of different talents, different abilities work together to develop a human interdependent society. So that's what I'm thinking about the new education should be.
Brilliant. And I also want to tie this to really democracy. I think it's so pivotal. And what you are basically are saying is first and foremost, we have to do our analysis has to be always be first and foremost centered on the individual. So they have to first find themselves. So the process of individuation of really what it means to be a human being. And I think that is pivotal because what we now witnessing is that, and this also has to do with obviously with enlightenment where things get more and more again outside, everything was projected outside, empiricism, science, whereas before everything was centered, you know within the spiritual, right? And so to some extent there is now a rift, and a lot of the things that we see today is that people project their problems outside. So in order to truly really find, dissect what's my meaning and how can I positively contribute to society, they now point the finger to others. So how do we go about this issue, and how can you actually separate the wheat from the chaff, because it's really tough.
Exactly. Well, if you think about democracy or anywhere, I think human beings tend to worry about things that they have nothing, they cannot do anything about. And I think, it's important for human beings to understand themselves and try to solve problems they can solve. Because I think, people get depressed, anxious about things they have no control. You know, the weather is going to go bad tomorrow. What are you going to do about it? So even like, democracy, policies you don't like, what are you going to do about it? Can you do something about it? I think that's why understanding yourself, limit what you worry about to things that you can actually do something about. I think I'm really focused on action. People like to say everybody can do something about something, That's for sure. But that something is different for different people. If you don't like certain policies, some people may take onto the streets to demonstrate. Some people may try to talk to their elected officials. Some people may organize nonprofit organizations to change that. Some people will make new policies and try to convince the legislature to change it. I mean, there are different ways. If you have different talents, you do different things. But action is necessary. So finding yourself, exploring yourself, know yourself, actually is not like taking a lesson. It is a process of actions you take, mini actions, small actions, big actions, whatever it is. I think human beings have to be action oriented. You have to do something. And even now, as a young person, as a student, you're trying to do something, you should do it and do it authentically. We actually have a new book that's going to be published soon. It's called Agents of Impact. Agents of Impact. And you can find that on right now for pre-order on Amazon, and it's through Solution Tree. It's Bill McDermott and Professor Ron Beghetto. We're all kind of professors in education, different fields. The three of us have been working on this for the past 2 or 3 years, and it's really the ideas have people learn to become an impact maker. Everybody can make an impact. You don't go to school to learn things just to be ready for college or something else. You can do something even as young as first graders, second graders. You can help your family, help your community. You can help greater things. We have a lot of young entrepreneurs. We have a lot of people who change the world in many ways. So I think to have that confidence, to have that courage, to have that orientation is very important action.
And it's also very important, what you also mentioned actually in the book, is you have to somehow have the feeling what's right and wrong. And you made a very, very important analogy. If someone just looks at the negative or if he just looks at the positive. And I think that's also something that helps us to really get more and more clear on what kind of impact we want to have on us and really the world. So unpack this. Why should you be cautious when it comes to deciding what you want to actually do in terms of positivity or negativity, and what's the difference?
That's why you should always consider, like we call other people. Other people. Are you leaving the place better than you found it? Are you helping others? And only through helping others can your value be realized. Again, I would just use you as an example. You have this talent to invite great conversations, and you are making a contribution to do this. And through this, you realize your value. And I think we need to teach our young children to understand that no matter how good you are, your action has to translate into benefits to other people. And if you translate into benefits to others, you create value for yourself. A person, no matter how great you are, unless you solve problems, you do something for other people, that value doesn't exist. And psychologically speaking, being able to help others is very rewarding. Being able to contribute to other people's lives is very rewarding. I mean, there are different kind of ethical rules in different cultures, different religions, different communities. But I think making other people's life better is a good general rule. You do not want to destroy others, or ruin others' natural environment. This comes down to environmental protection. We only have this one earth. We better do something nice about it. And all your value. I'm actually, this is interesting. You look at some people. They're very much into making money. They make a lot of money. And what do they do? Some people donate back to society. They feel better. If you kept making money, you can't enjoy counting how much money. And you will try to tell people, oh, I make this money, billions of dollars. But nobody listens to you. You have to have better impact on other people's lives. So I think that's probably a very good rule to have.
And I just want to quickly touch on that, what you're actually mentioning and what really life is about. And you also mentioned this in the book, and you are really the best example what it really means. In other words, what is more important than success in our social relationships? Unpack this, and we will come back actually to democracy because there's a lot to actually unpack, because there's something that worries me when I look at especially developing countries. For example, also more recently Bangladesh, who overturned democratic elected country, for example. But just quickly, let's go and answer the question: what is more important than success in our social relationships?
Well, I think that's a very deep and complex question. Is that, I think the social relationship has different levels. You have this coexistence. You live in a neighborhood. At least you don't have to go get in arguments, battles, fights, throw violence against your neighbors. That's the minimum thing you can do. Second thing, you keep your environment clean, do something about that. That's different. Then you have higher level. The highest levels you collaborate with other people. These are not, necessarily your social acquaintances, but they might be your collaborators. They could be scattered around different parts of the world. And that's where I think, honest trust is very important, and do not try to take advantage of social relationships. So I'm defining this in a very simple way. Help others, not trying to destroy others and benefit yourself. I think selfish actions seldom repay themselves. Some people are too selfish just to say, I want to take advantage of you. Ultimately, that's psychologically unsettling. And that's in the long run not rewarding. I think right now in the world, we're seeing the rise of a lot of selfish actions, selfish actors. I think it's absolutely important for us to try to go back to instill very simplistic a sense of not trying to take advantage of others. Try to offer help. Use again your greatness to help others, help the world. I think that is a lot more rewarding in the long run.
And that's what's so brilliant in your model, really. ICEE, right? This
Yeah.
exploration, this collaboration, entrepreneurship, all these things really relate in a dynamic way in which you can, in one way or another, positively influence your environment and your society as a whole. Now, I want to ask you, what is your take on AI on the technological front, really, and the fragility of social cohesion, and also while contemplating Bangladesh, for example, where more and more people think like we need change, we need to overthrow governments. But if you study a little bit history, usually those violent revolutions always actually gave birth to even worse. I mean, saw this in the Iranian Revolution. We saw it time and again. So how do we approach and communicate and dialogue with especially young people? Because that's what's driving, right? Today, if they see, let's say, an injustice, people immediately start pointing the finger rather than, as you also propose to some extent, rather first and foremost, really dissect and start understanding yourself, who you are, and what really your place is in the world. Because that's really the very onset of true transformation and positive impact.
Well, first of all, if you think about democracy, human, liberty, freedom, individual liberty and freedom. These are relatively new concepts in human history, and they are very fragile concepts. We would say that America is an experiment with democracy. I mean, most societies have had not a so-called democratic government. I mean, actually, the majority of them don't. And the number of democratic countries actually is very small. And democracy is always challenged. And so I think the dictatorship might actually have a better way to survive because they control people. And also there's another tendency for human beings when something doesn't work, like you said, they point fingers or they beg for an authoritarian figure to come down. They expect a deus ex machina, the god from the machine, to save them. They want actually people to have more power. That we need to give more power to one person to solve our problems. So this is why Bangladesh, Iran, actually many countries you've seen democracy revoked, democracy not surviving. This is who says America's democracy will go on forever? So I've always said, young people, if you want your rights, you have to act for it. If you want something, you have to do something for it. And I worry a lot about our education has not prepared our young children to think about their own liberty, their own freedom, and their rights. And instead, we teach them to go after their own interest, their own selfish interest. And that could, because financial interest or short term interest could put them on the wrong path. So I'm hoping that we won't teach our children you are responsible for your own life. And if you want something better, do something for it, do something about it. And age of AI is the same. For example, we all know, technologically speaking, all large AI systems belong to a few companies or some governments, and they control it. How are you going to change that? No individual could have the money to develop their own AI systems as large as others. So, but there are voices. You know what? However, we use AI actually challenges AI companies. And any text we produce goes back to them, can alter the system itself. And so in that regard, I think everybody has to take actions. We got to use them, got to correct them, change them. Another thing is that the competition among AI companies is good because enables users to make a choice. When we make a choice, that choice might affect how AI technology develops. But also, more importantly, AI is the field I'm worried most about. Is AI is used to developing weapons, developing AI-driven robotic fighters. If you look at Ukraine right now, Russia-Ukraine war, they're mostly fighting through drones, AI-driven drones, missiles. And imagine, like a Star Wars movie, we have an army of AI-driven soldiers. My God, can you believe that? I bet there are people developing those things. And what are we going to do about them? So I mean, I don't want to dive into the more difficult situation, but I think all of this rely on human beings, and human beings individually, we have to take actions, no matter how small the impact we can make. If we all are trying to make some impact, it changes the world.
And it's almost like an oxymoron, a conflict here, a contradiction that on one hand there are only a few big companies who control these large language models. On the other hand, we say that that's the free market, which I am for it because think it produces much more positive than actually negative. in terms of if you want to have like a planned economy, for example, like in China or in Russia. I think we don't want to go there because we know what it ultimately does to human flourishing. On the other hand, as you mentioned, right, we to some extent we also tend to ask the government to regulate it, right? And so therefore too there is this back and forth, but this is also part what a democracy is, right? It's always open discourse, and we have to always question and re-question, but we have to engage in it in a way that is helpful. So what worries you most in terms of freedom right now? Because there's a lot of fear that's going around in terms of obviously technology, but also freedom. And what can we do at the individual level as an educator, but also as a student, to really be clear about what freedom actually entails, that it might be a two-way street?
Well, I think freedom has always has consequences, right? I mean, like if you want certain freedom, you have to give up some freedom. Like when you talk about AI, you want government regulations, but at the same time, that regulation might take some freedom away. But if you don't have that, all the companies might ruin certain things. So I mean, it's a very interesting legal concept. But I think for us to think about individual freedom, freedom comes with responsibilities. If you exercise some freedom, you have to bear the responsibilities. You cannot simply say, I want to do this and ignore the long term consequences or unexpected consequences. We value the opportunity to make a contribution, but you also have to think about, is the contribution beneficial in the long run? Actually, a lot of, when you mentioned it early on, we talk about innovations, a lot of changes, innovations done, you cannot do them without freedom. But once you've done that, that innovation itself might cause massive damage to human beings. We have to think about ourselves. Should we do that? I'm kind of naive in this sense because I like to people to be naive. We don't really want to, at this age, in the 21st century, to spend more money developing weapons against each other, but also developing weapons. Think how much knowledge there is, how much insights, how much innovation. There's a lot of people involved in that. Perhaps they shouldn't do it, but they have to make a living. So who are the people developing them? So I mean, this is a very complex question, but I want people to have a debate in classrooms. Young students should be asking about this tough questions. Another thing comes down to freedom. We have so many different religions. It's a good thing to look at different religions trying to reconcile with each other, rather than in hundreds of years ago, we think the others are infidel. We got to kill them. Now at least we have agreed it's not a good idea trying to kill the other religion. But however, I don't think we have truly reconciled with everybody. People always are suspicious of other people. I've always wondered, like, for example, those are in one church, have they visited the other church or mosque? They probably have never. But we assume the others are doing something very evil and strange. But how come we don't think about that? I was thinking about immigrants. It's a very interesting topic today. When schools have a lot of immigrants, and we have different views of them. I said, why don't you do a little project? Have them just to live once. Have students exchange homes for one day. How about have the local student stay with the immigrant family for just one night? Sleep over, and then vice versa, and come back to tell their stories. Perhaps we'll reduce a lot of hatred through that or prejudice. Just something very simple, right? You can just go talk to them and might be different. Because like when you go on the street, you look at me, oh, that's an Asian Chinese guy, and then you make a lot of assumptions. But talk to him. He might be different. I think that kind of simple exchange ideas would be quite interesting. Or if you're a student, following my idea about strength, if you have immigrants, maybe have the immigrant students teach some courses about local culture, about their cuisine, about their language. Have them to be good at something. If you're a student like immigrant from Japan, from China, in a class, because your language is not good, your math may not be good, but can I ask you just to do a 15 minutes talk and to speak your native language and challenge a local student? Said, man, that's tough. It took you so long to get here. You're using a different language. That might change and may make the student feel proud that my native language is not a burden, is an asset. So that kind of things could change our views.
Brilliant. That's also really the basis of any psychotherapy in terms of acceptance. We have to first and foremost really start accepting people of who they are, and then only then they might change, if there is a necessity for change. I want to ask you a little bit about what drove you ultimately to America, and I want to connect it to democracy and freedom. And I want to explore if you think that the system is really responsible that allowed a certain culture emerge that sets by and large the US apart from any other country.
Well, I mean, I've lived in many different countries, visited different countries. I think the US started as a very, very interesting system that amazed or shocked many countries because its democracy is not only federal government. The federal government has the three branches of power, but also you should look at U.S. as hundreds of thousands of local micro systems. Let's say even the federal government can shut down. Can you believe in many other countries shut down the federal government? But the country moves. I'm not encouraging the government to shut down. So this is a very interesting experiment. But if you look at any local parks, schools, local governments, roads, they're very local. So they're driven by local democracies. You live in some neighborhood, you live in a building. If you're in a city, you pay some monthly fees to maintain your building. Whatever happens in the building or around is your local business. So in that sense, we need to examine America beyond one government. You look at, in which country can the state sue the federal government, as just happened? In what country can local small business sue the highest government? This is very interesting. So I think this whole process is fascinating, and how well it evolve, I don't know, because again, it's based on people. So in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, will the U.S. bounce back? We don't know. And but it has a good foundation. So I always admire a distributed system. The power is distributed. The power is distributed to many, many different units, different local governments, and different communities and different people. In that way, it's much harder to change. You've heard of the story of the starfish, right? The starfish is very hard to kill because its nerves is distributed and it moves slower, it's less smart. And then if you try to deal with a hornet, you can kill the hornet just with the one thing, right? Because it has a central nerve system. But a starfish, you cannot easily kill it because it's distributed. It moves slower. You look in the U.S. system, moves slower, not as fast as some other dictatorial countries, but it also stables. It's very interesting to rethink about this. So I think efficiency may not be the best goal for American system. However, because of the intertwined distributed power, makes this country quite unique. I don't think many other systems have the same power.
And also, it seems that there is no other country that you really wanted to live.
Yeah, it's the construct is very interesting. Not only me, I think there's a French philosopher who came to the U.S. in the 1800s, visited, say, we'll see if this democracy works. Because it's again, if you look at different states, like for example, in the U.S., you got 50 states. If one state fail or half of the states fail, it still have half of the states exist. You got the blue states, red states, which is good, and the voters shift. It's just fascinating. And I think the conflicts, the arguments, and differences matter. This is another way we view diversity matters. How you form your government. The different diversity of government actually is kind of interesting.
And I think this is also so important that we have to look at it as a process, in a constant process. That's really what democracy is. But in particular, when it comes to the US, I always think that if you really look at the very onset of the United States of America, it's a miracle that they defeated the greatest empire at the time and how it came into being. So
Yeah,
therefore, I think, and you are the best example. You are one of these unicorns, right? That flock into the country because there's a certain spirit
yeah.
that just attracts people. And therefore, I'm curious what you think, but I'm extremely positive when it comes to the future of the United States because precisely of its diversity and its system and its intertwinedness and its way of solving and resolving conflict, because ultimately in the long run it will always hopefully improve the culture but also democracy as a whole.
Well, Yannick, that may be the last question I can answer because I have another meeting. But I think what you said is really fascinating. I think the future of America largely depends on our schools. Because when we say get children ready for the future, no, no, no. We get them ready to make the future. It depends on how our schools teach our children who are the future makers. The future could be 10 years, 15, 20, 50 years, 100 years. Our schools have to change to make our children to reach their greatness through personalization, finding and solving problems, and build human interdependence. To help everybody become ethical, to worry about other people's benefits as their own benefits, to realize that our own value is realized through helping others.
Professor Dr. Yong Zhao, it's such a pleasure always. I could go on, and I just want to really tell everyone, let's get a copy of this great book and all the other book of Yong Zhao. What an outstanding professor, intellectual, and always a huge honor to have you, and hopefully you are back soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yannick. Always a pleasure talking to you. With best wishes.
Yong Zhao. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Mentor.